Good. Hey, everyone. It's really nice to see a lot of friendly faces and familiar names. And I'm pretty excited to get to do this. I have to say, this is quite an exercise. This is probably the first time I ever thought about putting my body of work together from the beginning to present day, which is quite an exercise and maybe a little more time consuming than I planned, but there's lots of long-term benefits to that. I scanned many slides that I have never scanned before. And what I really, what really came home from doing this is, what really struck me after this exercise was obviously how much things have changed over the last few decades, how my photography style has changed, but also the access that we had back then, the access in the 80s and 90s, especially to railroads and being able to basically crawl around a yard and sign a waiver and go wherever you want. And then also just to be able to wander railroad property and not I don't mean on the tracks obviously and in the yards, but being able to just have the access. And it's really something. The other thing that struck me is how much I had to leave out. There's an awful lot I left out, and this is the tip of the iceberg. So I left out Donner Pass, I left out the San Joaquin Valley, I left out most of the UP LANSL, so I'll definitely have to save those for other shows. But I will go ahead and share my screen because the way I'll do this is I'm going to kind of follow along with the pictures, and we will begin in Southern California, where it all began for me. And let's see if this works. Okay, everyone, can you see what's going on? Can you see a
Yep, it looks like we can see your screen share okay. Anybody not see that, put something in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay, off you go.
All right. Okay, hang on a sec. I'm just going to clear this. So for me, this is where it all began. Well, I was born in Berkeley in the Bay Area, but we moved south to Fontana, California, to a steel mill town, the home of Kaiser Steel. And I was very lucky in that I grew up obviously in the 70s and 80s there. And in my teenage years, I had Cajon Pass and Beaumont Hill and the desert, and just all of these great Southern California iconic places. And one of those places was Devore, which is what you see here at sunrise in 1993 with a Santa Fe freight. And so what I thought is we'll just start from the beginning and take you through a tour. Let's see if I can get this to, if I can get my slideshow to work. There we go. Okay. We'll start in Southern California, where I lived until 2000 when my wife Laura and daughter Catherine moved north to the Bay Area and then to Monterey County in the Monterey Bay Area. And then I'll end, since this is the Pacific Northwest archive, I will definitely end with some Northwest photography that I hadn't looked at in a really long time. So I thought this would be a great slide to kind of kick things off, since it's a meeting of North and South. This is back in like 1990 when the Santa Fe had repainted their FP45s, rebuilt FP45s into their original red and silver colors, but now with big, bold Santa Fe lettering. And they unveiled the Super Fleet marketing campaign. And so I hiked over to a junction in San Bernardino, California, because the train was stopped there. And so why not? I just strolled right into the junction and snapped pictures of the train, which had a big, long string of power. And suddenly I could hear something coming, and there was a Santa Fe train with a Burlington Northern ST40 on the point. And at the time I was so thrilled, not knowing what was to come, the merger that was going to change everything. But let's, again, like I said, we'll start at the beginning. So I got into trains because my dad was a train nut, and my mom and he would go on all these crazy trips out to the desert, and we would spend weekends in Barstow. And so you see this photo here on the left, that's like 1972. So this is like little 6-year-old Elrond with his Rabbit Harry and his Santa Fe shirt, and 5630 back there, and one of the brand new yellow bonnets that had just been painted. And then in somewhere around 1979, I began to get really into trains. I was in junior high, And I met this guy, Bob Spinuzzi, who is my lifelong friend. And we both realized we love trains, and we began going on adventures together. And we both were big Centennial fanatics. And there I am at the Centennial storage line in Yermo in 1982, on top of 6946. And what a devilishly handsome young man you see there with his super cool "We Can Handle It" t-shirt, Centennial shirt, and good old early 80s hair. Yeah, just wonder why I didn't have girlfriends. So my granddad in 1982 said he had been watching me take pictures with my little Instamatic, and he said, "You need a real camera." And so he gave me his Minolta SRT 101 that he got as a retirement present from Kaiser Steel. And so that was what really set me on my photographic journey. And so that's why I basically count from 1982 is when it felt like, then it became official. I had a real camera. And if you look closely, you will see some magazines surrounding that camera. And those 3 issues of Trains that you can see are the ones that changed my life. Devore was one of our big hangouts at the foot of Cajon Pass. And we had these friends we had met, Chuck and Artie Eason from New York. And Chuck and Artie, on one of their trips, said, "We have some magazines for you because we think you might like these guys." And they gave me these 3 issues, which were all 1970s issues of Trains magazine, with Dick Steinheimer's Cajon Pass Revisited, Mojave Crossing, his epic story about the Mojave Desert, and Ted Benson's All Nevada issue, which was just mind-blowing to me. I went through these magazines and held them, and I think a ray of sunlight hit me and the choir sang, and I thought, that's what I want to do with my life. This is the way I want to shoot. I want to shoot like these guys. And I was very lucky to have mentors like that. And so off I went. But this is San Bernardino, California, circa 1988. And I had about 3 major hangout spots. And one of them was San Bernardino, because you had a great parking lot. You had the Santa Fe shops, newly rebuilt engines would park out in, like, right in front of the parking lot by the station platform. And you could see, like, everything Santa Fe just rebuilt. If they had new engines and they were kind of checking them out in the shops, they would be parked out there. But you could see the shops behind the 2 switchers. And of course, the best thing was every Santa Fe train had to stop for a crew change. And so we would get all kinds of crazy power, but especially there was a bridge, the Mount Vernon Viaduct, and I would hike up that bridge and look to see whatever was coming out of the shops and whatever was going in. And in this case, look at all those great cars. I mean, actually, over the years, I've come to enjoy the cars as much as I enjoy the locomotives. But at this point, this is around 1985, and Santa Fe had gone into a trade with Amtrak for SDP 40S in exchange for their switchers. And so you can see one of the SDPs is going into is like in the middle of being rebuilt by Santa Fe. You can see a fresh one back there coming out. You can see an F-45 and some other power. But I would either drive over the Mount Vernon overpass to see what was new, or park in the park by the depot and then just hike up the bridge and take pictures. And then we'd get trains would pull up, stop, get their orders, change crews, and in some cases we would get really unusual. Santa Fe always had unusual power. There was always variety and a mix, but in this case, some of the newest GEs had just come in, and this was a trio of the first trio. I think they were B39-8s, and it was so cool to see the newest of the new, and then see the oldest in their last legs going into the shops. And this was the San Bernardino station, which is still around and still looks great. Things have definitely changed quite a bit, but I thought I'd share one more of those wild trains. This is when SD60s were brand new, and we learned about a demonstrator run that was going to go up Cajon Pass, and these are the kind of things we would get that would pull up and stop, and a little herd of rail fans would pull up, or would gather around them, snap their pictures, and then everyone would run to their cars and chase them up Cajon Pass. So it was a pretty great place to hang out. This is Fontana, and this is where this is literally like 2 blocks from my house. I had the Southern Pacific's former Pacific Electric line to the north of me, and then I had Santa Fe's Pasadena subdivision to the south of me. And if you notice, the old PE line had tons of PE relics and artifacts, and you could see that there's a wigwag. I'm still learning like how to frame things, but you could see the wigwag mounted to the old trolley pole. And you know, there were original trolley poles all along the line. It was just amazing. But by this point in the 1980s, it was all switchers and locals that were running on the line. Obviously, PE was long gone. And then I would chase trains west to Upland in Southern California. And in this case, you see one of the same locals on that line going over Route 66, just east of town. And the Kodachromes were just beginning to arrive. The SPSF merger was threatening, and we all thought Santa Fe and SP as we knew it were going to vanish forever. I threw this in because this is one of the oldest slides where I remember thinking, well, that looks good. This was in 1983, and we had the UP, Missouri Pacific and Western Pacific merger had happened, and WP Jeeps were starting to invade the Colton area, which was close to where I lived in Southern California. And this is one of the few times I got one of the Santa Fe's bookend schemes with a beautiful pinstripe and the big lettering. And there were very few of these left. Everything had been painted in yellow bonnet by this point. So I was pretty excited to get that. So here is DeVore. This is where Bob and I would hang out, and our friend Marky Smith and tons of other rail fans. And this was a place where you could get Santa Fe with Union Pacific trackage rights, and then to the left, Southern Pacific's Palmdale cutoff, all within a stone's throw of each other. So you could be in one spot and get all the trains, have all the trains come to you. And this was all at the foot of Cajon Pass, so you could go and chase trains up and down the hill if you wanted to, or chase them down to San Bernardino. But I love that shiny red boxcar right after the power. It's got one of those Frankenstein jobs where I think they extended the height. And this was one of my very, very favorites. This was in 1985, and it was the first time it snowed in Cajon, and I could go up there. I had a car, finally. I had a 74 Maverick, and I could get up to Cajon while the snow lasted, because, you know, as you Northwesterners know, you know, in Southern California, it's a novelty to us because if it snows, it lasts like a day, maybe 2 days, maybe 3 if we're lucky. But in this case, it was a Saturday and I wasn't in college, and I could go up. And this was a westbound that had one of those rebuilt SDP 40Fs as the third unit. And I'd driven up the old Route 66, saw this, raced around to come back and get it at Blue Cut, which is just in the lower parts of Cajon Pass. And you could see the SD45 has snow on the number boards, and then the two other units are freshly rebuilt from the Santa Fe shops. And you could see a whole string of cotton belt cars from an SP train going up the hill in the distance. And the sun came out just in time for the shot, so it's pretty fun for me. This is farther up the pass. This is an area where the two Cajon tunnels were. And, you know, it was really the place where, oh, I hear people. You might want to turn on your mute. Oh, well. Well, we'll wait. We'll tough it along. This is one of those areas where you could escape from the freeway. And, you know, when I was growing up, I had a lot of rail fans tell me, you missed all the good stuff. It's already over. You know, it's not as good now. And I mean, to be in that area around the tunnels and have Santa Fe trains go up and down the hill with cabooses, and I mean, I kept thinking, well, this all seems pretty great to me. And now, of course, I look back and I realize I grew up during a really great time to be in Cajon. So I threw these in mainly because the Burlington Northerns, I have to, you know, work the Northwest crowd, but this was one of those crazy Christmas lash-ups we got because the SPSF merger had been denied. But of course, Santa Fe had something like 160 locomotives all painted in red and yellow Kodachrome colors. And so we had these things for years before the railroad finally got serious and began to repaint them all. But this was just such a crazy lash up with one Kodachrome leading 6 Burlington Northerns. So as I got more confident with shooting, I would drive further beyond Summit, outside of Cajon Pass, and get into the Mojave Desert and Barstow. It was like a homecoming for me. I began to show up as Barstow, you know, now in my card, making my own trips. And one of the things I always wanted to do before they rebuilt the locomotive, or they built a new locomotive facility at the west end of town. This is at the east end, and these are the historic shops that Santa Fe touted in the 1950s. And I always wanted to like get brave and run down to the tracks and like actually get like something looking at me with those big Santa Fe Railway billboard lettering. And I mean, I lucked out and got an F-45, and to me, which is such a quintessential Santa Fe locomotive. But so that's what we're seeing here this is in the very late 1980s. These shops were demolished in 1989, and when the new facility opened. So, and this is in 1984, and this was my first pan experience. I was in Bob Gallegos's yellow Datsun pickup truck, and we had been rail fanning all day, and we shot a Centennial, which is coming next. But there was this train waiting to leave that we had chased from Daggett to Yermo. And so this train is on the LASL line, the Los Angeles and Salt Lake, heading from Yermo, which is just outside of Barstow, heading to Las Vegas and points east. But I got in Bob's pickup truck, climbed in the back, and there we were bouncing on this old highway at 70 miles an hour, racing this double stack train with some Chicago Northwestern engines. And these were some of the coolest pan shots I ever got. And that's when I got bit by the bug. But before that had happened, I got one of my very favorite Centennial photos. We were dying to get one on the point. We'd seen a couple of them trailing during the day. And finally, we saw 6938 leaving Yermo, and we raced down to Daggett, which is where this is the Santa Fe Needles district. But you could see tracks are going off into the distance, and this seems like a short train. But what's happening is the train is curving off the Union Pacific trackage onto Santa Fe rails, where it's going to use trackage rights to take itself down to through the desert, down Cajon Pass, and then off to it would get back to the UP would get back to their own rails at Riverside Junction, and then it would take their own rails into LA. But it was pretty exciting to get this Centennial, which I am a huge Centennial fanatic, some of you know, and to get this one leading, and also all those little line side pieces of character, the cantilever, Bernard's cabinet shop, the pickup or the work truck, all those little details to me make the shot just as much. So with Bob Gallegos again, I went on a further trip. We went out to Arizona. This was one of my favorite shots. This is at the Colorado River. I'm on the California side. I've hiked up a hill from Route 66, which is in the foreground, and we've been following this train back from Arizona. And it had a Kodachrome on the point, one of their little General Electric B boats, leading a bunch of blue and yellows. But I really loved the light, was just so perfect. And this is very much winter light for this river crossing. And so in the late 80s, this was kind of the beginning of the whole resurgence of Santa Fe. They had, unfortunately, you know, Santa Fe was building, they had planned for a railroad museum in Albuquerque of their own equipment. But when the SPSF merger happened, they felt like they just weren't, it wasn't going to happen. They knew the writing was on the wall. There was going to be, they could not guarantee that they could pull off this museum. And so they gathered their entire historic collection and moved it to Sacramento, to the State Railroad Museum. And so if you kind of look through the fueling racks, you could see there are 3 Kodachromes pulling some of their big steam and their last 2 F7A and B units. And these are the units. So also it's great to get a caboose, but those are the units that would become that would be painted into red and silver colors and are now at the State Railroad Museum on display. But you'll see them a few more times coming up. So also I began to explore branch lines, and this is the Redlands line that left San Bernardino and kind of climbed a light grade up to the town of Redlands, where my wife Laura grew up. And so going to see her gave me a chance to chase this local back and forth. And this was probably as Southern California as it gets for me. A small town branch line, a white crossbuck, the milk sign, the Quonset hut, and then the clearing storm over Mount Baldy. And this has all become a Metrolink line with self-propelled rail cars that shoot back and forth over this. And it is one of these days I'm going to try to see if I can do an after shot versus the before. but I was pretty excited to get this. And this became a cover of Pacific Rail News, so I was really proud. It was one of my first big articles that I ever did on the Redlands branch. And you can see it was just all this beautiful open space. And this is all east of LA. The Redlands line left San Bernardino, which was near where I grew up. And it went through all this beautiful pastoral countryside, palm trees, agriculture. This is all office buildings now and warehouses. But it's pretty, I felt very fortunate to get to capture this while it still looked like the Southern California of old. So my other big hangout was Santa Mateo Canyon and West Fulton. So this is the Southern Pacific Sunset Route. And this is one of my all-time favorite photos where I was chasing a westbound from Beaumont at the top of the grade down to Redlands. So this is all about roughly halfway between Palm Springs and Los Angeles, for those of you trying to get your bearings. But Santa Mateo Canyon is just west of Beaumont. So this westbound is going down the hill, and that's Mount San Jacinto behind it, filling the frame. So in West Fulton, you know, there was variety on Santa Fe, but there was even more variety on SP because SP just kept everything running. And so we had GP9s. You can see over to the right, there's a GP40X leading an SD39, and there's just, it was a never-ending variety of power. And then they would pull power from other railroads too. So it was just mind-blowing. But this was one of my favorite catches, just as far as, maybe not my favorite shot, but definitely one of my favorites as far as a mixed bag of locomotives. And so I was standing on the Pepper Street overpass, which any Southern Californian worth his salt knows. If I'm looking west in the last shot, now I'm looking east towards Slover Mountain. And the SP had their balloon tracks, so all their transfer jobs from West Fulton to LA would leave the departure yard, go around the balloon track, and come back. And so you can see here, there's a couple of GP35s, which at the time were pretty rare still to see. They had survived the SPSF almost merger, but they were definitely living on borrowed time at this point. And also, so is Slover Mountain. That mountain you see in the back, that has all been raised over the course of this was taken in 1996. So I would say that mountain, it took another 30 years, but that mountain's gone now. It is so surreal to go back to Pepper now and see all the way east to Redlands. And so this is just to give you one more little taste of what it was like in Santa Mateo Canyon. This is a eastbound train that has left West Fulton, and it's climbing the hill in East Redlands. And if you look, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but I'm going to take my little marker here. This is to give you an idea of what kind of a bowl the San Bernardino Valley is. If you look where, let's see if I can get my little marker. Here we go. My cursor is circling a little area that looks like freeways. That is the 15 freeway, paralleled by the Santa Fe and SP lines up Cajon Pass. So that is the opening that takes you to Cajon Pass. So it's amazing that you can see how they drop down into San Bernardino, and now I'm at the opposite side of the valley, and here are SP trains leaving that same bowl to climb up the hill and get to Beaumont, Palm Springs, and head off to Arizona. So I also became a signal fanatic. As some of you know, I have a real searchlight in my backyard, thanks to a friend who probably everyone knows. But back in the late 80s and early 90s, I began to really get into signals, and I just was fascinated by their character and what they added to a photograph and their history. And so these are both along the Sunset Route. And this is on the left, it's a 1995 shot at Mons, which is just west of Palm Springs. And to the right, that is a searchlight with its shadow lit by the moon beside the Salton Sea, which is much further out past Palm Springs and Indio. And so this was the wave of excitement that began to happen in Southern California. The F7s that you had seen earlier that were owned by the State Railroad Museum, they were moved down to San Bernardino, where the shop forces restored them back to their red and silver war bonnet glory. And so Santa Fe in 1989 decided they were going to make a film, a customer film, and they were going to recreate their Super Chief, which you see here. So this F7 A and B set is mated up to the Santa Fe's business car fleet. And this train parked in Pasadena and also filmed up in Cajon Pass. And the reason it's sitting here, and if you look, you can see it, there's a special agent parked there, and he's making sure no one crosses the tracks. And believe me, there was a huge crowd behind me. But he doesn't want anyone to cross because there was a photo freight with 3 blue and yellow GP60s that would roll past the Super Chief train for the cameras. And this was Santa Fe's way of showing old and new. And here it is again up on Cajon Pass, which was quite a staggering sight to see this thing going up the hill. And you know, for someone who, my first train ride was on a San Diegan with my mom and dad, which basically was a train of Santa Fe Power from LA to San Diego, but it was Amtrak. And I never thought I would ever photograph something like this. Now, if you look really close in the back at the end of the train, you can see there's a pair of blue and yellow EMDs that are pushing the train because the F units weren't powered. But it was still quite an amazing sight. And then it got even better because LA Union Station had its 50th anniversary. And so they recreated that great publicity photo from the 50s of the big 3 Western railroads using 2, flanking the UPE unit is power from the State Railroad Museum, their Southern Pacific 6051, and then the F7A and B set to the right. And it's super cool that UP even put train 104 in the number boards for the city of Los Angeles. And then, as if we weren't already overloaded, and so much was going on during this time, this is in May of 1989, the word got out that 4449 and 8444, at the time, it was 4 digits, they were going to go up Cajon Pass side by side. And never in my wildest dreams did I'd ever think I'd see 2 steam engines thundering up the pass together. And this didn't happen everywhere because the 4449 was having some issues, and so it would fall behind. So some people got really shafted. But because they would get the 844 train roll by, and then here comes the daylight. But I decided to go to Blue Cut, and I'm standing beside Route 66, and there are literally thousands of people along the railroad, along the highway. Thousands of people, hundreds of cars. As far as you could see, there were cars. So it really was a one-shot deal. You were going to get one shot, and that was it. And boy, this was the shot. So, and the thing that I wish I could convey is the sound. The sonic experience was just mind-blowing. It was one of the greatest sounds greatest of, railroad sonic experiences I've ever had. So those F7s were the beginning of the super fleet, as I mentioned before, and here they are in Cajon Pass, the 105, and this is actually the engine you saw in that one of those first slides. They went up the hill as a quartet, and this happened back and forth. I mean, this was like a daily, not quite daily because there were only 8 of these, but they were on a regular run most of the time LA to Chicago, but sometimes they would get caught in a Barstow to LA loop. And then we would get them even more often. This train is climbing up the hill to Sullivan's Curve. And I believe there might be another one. Okay, so there's a few FP45s because this was the story, at least for us, this was the story of 1989, was the return of the war bonnet. And so to commemorate that, photographer Steve Smollinger, the late Steve Smollinger, contacted me because my first job after graduating from Cal State San Bernardino was with Interurban Press. And I was an assistant editor for Pacific Rail News Magazine, and then I was an editor for the books division. But Steve called me and said, would the magazine back me if I went to Mike Martin at Santa Fe PR and we did a night shoot in Franklin Canyon with the 199 train and the super fleets? And I said, heck yeah, without talking to anyone else. I said, of course. So Steve called Mike Martin and they arranged to do this night shoot. And so this is in Franklin Canyon of October of '89. And I mean, this is the hottest train on the railroad, and they stopped it for us. We actually had a test shoot with another freight before this. And then here comes the 199. And you can see it's so nicely lit. We're using Ted Benson's lights. Stan Kistler is behind the power, and he's lighting up the trees. And then notice how you can see the train so well going off into what is the tunnel of Franklin Canyon. That's because my wife, Laura, the greatest trooper ever, is back there with a flash bulb and her radio, standing next to a tunnel portal in the darkness and a flashlight. And when she gets her call on the radio, she lit up the train. And so it was a an amazing team effort, but I couldn't be prouder of my wife. And so one more of the fun FP45 series. This was the first time I ever met Dave Lustig face to face. We ever actually met in person. We'd known each other through writing and phone calls, but I was chasing this train up the hill, and this is east of Cajon Summit when it begins to turn into desert. It's called Lugo, and David was officially shooting this for Santa Fe. And so he had the train stop where he did some beautiful photos. And by the way, Calmbeck has that special issue of Santa Fe out right now. This train is on the cover. It's stage shot. And so after he did his beauty photos, he asked the crew to get out. They had their war bonnet caps, and he did a group portrait of them. So this was really fun. And I remember I went up to Dave. I said, "When's the train going to leave?" And he looked at me with, like, as only David Lustig can. He looked at me with a little smile and he said, "When I say it can." And I went, oh, I couldn't believe someone had that power. It was pretty cool. So one more before I end the FP45 stories. This was my first selfie, an old school photo, when I found a Santa Fe freight sitting near Riverside, California. I'd just gotten a new job from, I'd left Interurban Press and I was working for Kaiser Permanente, which is why I'm so dressed up. But I was driving back and forth from home to Riverside and back. As I'm coming back, there's the Santa Fe train sitting there by the freeway overpass. So I bail off the exit, get up to the train, and I realized no one's on the train. They've locked it down. They didn't even lock the cab. So, as you know, brilliant, crazy 20-somethings do, I climbed up the side of the FP45 and climbed on board and took pictures out like I was the crew, and I'm taking all these great photos. And I thought, well, no one's ever going to believe me that I really did this. So I hung out the window and took I think was my first selfie. And so you can see my Nikon FE2 then, because I left Minolta and had moved to Nikon. But also, look at all that hair. My goodness, those were the days. So the FP45s were themselves a prelude to the 100 class GP60Ms. And so this is their first morning in Los Angeles at Santa Fe's Hobart Yard. And I was taking all these great roster shots, and Mike Martin from Santa Fe PR let me climb up ride up with him in the cherry picker to take some really nice nose-on shots. But this was my favorite because I loved that there you could see the railroad was so excited. The super fleet was truly born now because the new engines had arrived. And here's this guy, hosing and cleaning them off for their publicity run up to home the next day. So then the final wave of the arrival of the new super fleet were the GEs, and this was the first train I caught with 3 super fleet GEs. This is at Frost, California, where there is a flyover where one track rises up and crosses over the other. And so at this point, the Santa Fe hotshot is in the foreground, is much higher than the other train. But the other train, there was this eastbound that was stopping to drop off helpers. And I couldn't believe it. The 3 GEs rolled right in front of this old school helper set. And I mean, what a set it was. It's a GP30 and a GP39-2 and a GP20. And in 1990, those were still helpers on the Santa Fe. It was just incredible. And this is probably one of my favorite Sullivan's Curve photos. And, I grew up seeing all these wonderful photos that, all the greats have shot. And I just thought, I don't know what I could ever do that would be a little different. And I finally decided to get in close and use my wide and try to, emphasize those dynamic rocks, that I'd loved all my life. And so I lucked out and knew this train I'd been chasing this one up, and I lucked out with getting 4 of these gorgeous Superfleet GEs, and you can see one of the new AMDs is on there, one of these SD75Ms. This was what we got from about 1993 to 1995. That was quite a ride. And you probably couldn't ask for a better present. This was their Christmas train that they were doing for employees and for school kids in the area. And this is the Christmas train leaving San Bernardino to do a short little run up Cajon with a nice bow on the front. So I think we all got the present. So this was the era of Santa Fe, and I'm going to buzz a little bit quicker through here because I want to make sure we get through everything. But in Barstow, you just never knew what was going to show up next. You would get blue and yellow Santa Fe's, red and silver Santa Fe's, you get UP trains, you get pool power. There, behind that UP train that's switching at the east end, there's some Motive Power International engines and SP engines behind it. So you just never knew what you were going to see. And I love this sign. That was one of the things that, as I began to get a little smarter about photography, I began to realize that all these little details weren't going to last. And this is at Cajon Summit, where a pair of helpers are about to help. I think they're just cutting off from a train before they run back down the hill. But I love this Southern California Division sign that shows its heritage. And so this was the change that was coming to San Bernardino, as the BNSF merger was pretty much a year away at this point, maybe 2 years away. Santa Fe tore down their shops. They closed the shop complex that I grew up with, and they transformed it into an intermodal yard. And then to the right, that's the parking lot where I would just hang out for, God, forever. And where so many days we'd spent, with many, many great rail fan friends, and enjoying all these Santa Fe trains and power, and it was all coming to an end. Metrolink had debuted as the new commuter train service for LA, and this was their first line from San Bernardino to LA. And so they rebuilt the entire area, and only the depot is recognizable. Everything else is different in this shot. There's even a pedestrian bridge that goes over to some of the tracks to the left, and it's changed drastically. But this was kind of my farewell shot, where I think I kind of got that last feel of what it was like with Santa Fe and the early days of Metrolink, and San Gorgonio and the Mount San Gorgonio in the background. So this was all coming to an end. The mergers were happening, but boy, this was like a 1993 or 94 shot, and it's one of the few times I ever got like all three of the big Western roads together in one lash up. And this is out at Martinez Spur. This is east of Cajon Summit. And I couldn't believe my eyes when this came around, because we never saw the three of them like this, all arranged together in elephant style of all things. But you could see the Southern Pacific engine has the Rio Grande style lettering, because they had been bought by Phil Anschutz then, who owned Rio Grande. And they were all getting their new coats of paint with the big lettering on the side. But it was pretty cool to get that. And then this is, as the BNSF merger became, these green and orange locomotives began to show up, the Heritage ones. And this really shows the area around Summit so well, because you could see there's a westbound going down. And if you look in the distance, you can see there's a train coming up with Santa Fe and BN power. And there's also the power from another train that's visible in the distance. So, and these were two helper SD40s that were helping the Superfleet engines up. They would cut off once they got to the top of the hill. But it was amazing to get all this in one shot. And so UP was changing too. The SD40s that I grew up with, Bob and I used to call, they were the hated -2s. And Bob and I would say, how many -2s today? 3 -2s, 4 -2s. But the SD40s were going, and this was the new generation of power was beginning to arrive. And this, for a few months in the late 90s, I began to go up to Hill 582 and some of the areas around Cajon Summit, and I would photograph. I would basically set up to catch trains at first light, and this was one of my big favorites. So of course, I haven't even mentioned Tehachapi, but here's just a few quick shots of Tehachapi. This was probably my favorite as far as a panorama goes, having that Santa Fe and the BNSF engines up front. And then if you look over to the right, you can see a pair of BN SD40s that are helping the train midway through. And also, as you can guess, this is February because it's green. And this is a slightly older shot, but this is another one of my favorites that I shot from Highway 58, which kind of rolls. I'm basically standing on the side of Highway 58 here, catching the tank train, which ran from LA to just outside of Bakersfield, and with those glorious tunnel motors in charge. And this is 1989, so definitely this is all, Southern Pacific is still very much intact, and the SPSF merger is, has been scuttled. And if you look up to the on that shelf in the distance, you can see a Santa Fe train also moving through the hills. And this was a surprise that I hadn't looked at this in so long. This was a photo at Monolith, and this is so this is on the Tehachapi line, but it's just south east of the town of Tehachapi. And there's a huge cement plant called Monolith there. But this was one of my favorites because I actually got like those beams of light, and we love the Mars lights so much, but this is one of the few times I was able to actually capture the beams, at least back in those days. And then probably my other huge favorite shot from Tehachapi was chasing the 6936 on a Wimmer engineering special across the desert into Mojave, up over the Tehachapi Mountains. And then when we got to the loop, there was a train ahead of this guy that stalled. And so this special came to a halt, and I had this gorgeous Centennial all to myself with this beautiful little train. And I shot pretty much every conceivable angle, but I will spare you all of those. This was probably my favorite. So the other change coming on board with SP was new power was actually arriving, and some of the modern stuff we'd seen on Santa Fe and UP was finally coming to SP. And this was, I believe, these are SD70Ms, and this was, I think, one of their very first runs out of West Fulton. And they even had lumber behind them, which was pretty cool to see. That was not a common sight for us in West Fulton. And so then I chased it up the hill to Cajon. But this was kind of a nice early morning shot of the the new look for SP. This was 1994, so the UP-SP merger was just around the corner. So one other highlight from Southern California is Mission Tower. And one of my first assigned jobs from Trains Magazine was to shoot a day at Mission Tower and capture just a day in the life because passenger trains were coming back to LA. And so this turned out to be a pretty nifty time capsule because there were F40s and Amfleet cars, and then you still had plenty of private cars behind the old school superliners, and that's actually the Los Angeles rolling on the, let's see, I believe that's the Sunset Limited that it was getting ready to move up, and then it'll back to the left and get into position at the station for a later departure. And the Redondo Junction Roundhouse, which was nearby, this was the old Santa Fe built roundhouse where 3751, the steam locomotive, is still based. And it was one of my few shots I did of the roundhouse, which has since been torn down. But as I've been told, it took about they were worried about seismic retrofits. They were worried that they couldn't do a retrofit and there'd be seismic worries. And turns out there were something like 3 different wrecking balls they had to go through before they could even get the thing to begin to collapse. And it was a tough old roundhouse. And it's a shame it's not there anymore, but I was glad to at least get something. So speaking of 3751, I wanted to at least get in a couple quick shots. This was a locomotive that Bob and I both worked on as teenagers, and we were in the tender chipping out limestone, and we crawled on the roof and helped with different kinds, whatever the restoration team needed. And so it's always a thrill when she gets out on the main line. And this is her leaving Bakersfield in 1999, and that gorgeous, late day summer sun as she's blasting out of town. And everyone else is off in the photo line chasing it, but I was so glad to be over here by myself. And here she is on her trip to Arizona in 2002. This is out in the Mojave Desert with that beautiful glint light. And the neat thing is I had a telly with me and a wide angle, and the telly shot was, this is what I wanted for the telly shot. And then I thought I was going to shoot a wide angle. Well, all of a sudden I hear all the guys behind me are just cursing and screaming. And I turn around and look, and there's a westbound freight coming, and it's going to block all of them. It's going to block everybody's shot. So thank God I had this telly, so I was able to do this. And these guys are both moving at full speed. And 3751 has dimmed the headlights for the freight, for the piggyback train. And I couldn't believe this happened. And there I was snapping away. And I don't think I said anything to the other guys because they'd probably killed me. So speaking of the desert, it's a little bit more Burlington Northern Joy. But, once the merger happened, we got all kinds of crazy rainbow lash-ups. And this is one of my all-time favorites. This is out between Barstow and Needles on the Needles subdivision. And this was a place that was made famous by my idol, Dick Steinheimer. And this was, one of my all-time favorite magazines. And one day I decided in the late 90s, before the war bonnets vanished, I thought, I'm going to go out there and try to get the Ash Hill shot. And I lucked out and got a really clean war bonnet. This was the last order of red and silvers that, were ever ordered. BNSF, didn't have a new scheme at the time they made the order, so they decided to go red and silver. And so I was pretty excited to get this and pretty much match the angle. The Ash Hill sign you can see is a little different, but the old signal is still in the same spot. And it was pretty fun to get to, pay a little homage to my hero. So we're going to buzz along a little bit because I'm going to make sure I don't wear you guys out entirely, but a little bit of UP in Cajon Pass. This is more of Beaumont Hill, which was about to change drastically because those beautiful old signal bridges were all being retired and replaced, and the UP merger was kicking into full gear. Because this photo is in 1996, and I love this one very much because that was the feel of San Mateo Canyon in the in the years when I was rail fanning up there. And gosh, the old pole line is still there. Everything is there. It's a little bit of a different place. It's still a fun place to rail fan, but this is even further out. This is along the Salton Sea at Bertram, and I did an article for Trains Magazine on the Salton Sea, which is a really fascinating, bizarre place. And you can barely see the sea. If you look just beside the UP engine, down where the slope of the ballast is, you could just see the sea. But this was such a great spot because this guy was waiting and this beautiful soft evening light was coming. And here comes this stack train blasting by the other train. And you could see a crew van is coming to go take care of, this guy because their crew had gone dead. The other neat thing of going out there was Laura and I got to hang out with a Border Patrol crew as they inspected trains. And this took about 3 months of coordination with the U.S. Border Patrol before we got the okay. But it was pretty amazing to get to hang out with them. And then there's one more little roadside photo that I love my roadside signs very much. This was one of my favorites from the old Corvina estates back when the Salton Sea had seen better days. And so a few shots from the more modern era of Southern California. We go back down quite a bit, and here's the Big Boy by Route 66, which is, I did a book on Route 66 and never thought I'd see a big boy rolling next to the highway, but there it is. Amazing things happen. And I think this is probably one of my last farewell shots before we moved to the Central Coast. This is where Laura and our daughter Catherine and I moved in 2001. And this is the Salinas Valley is a pretty amazing area and a beautiful valley. And it's the land of John Steinbeck. It's America's salad bowl. Almost 50% of all produce is grown in this land. And we have the coastline, which when I first got there was still a happening railroad. There were 7 to 8 trains a day, plus the Coast Starlights. You could still see a lot of Southern Pacific searchlights, private cars, but a lot of power still said SP. And if you went to San Luis Obispo, you could. This was late 90s, but you could still see helper sets. You still had the feel of the old Southern Pacific coastline. And these are a few that are a little bit older, but I think, yeah, here's a little bit more modern. Here's the Coast Starlights meeting at San Luis Obispo, which is still a tradition that goes back to the daylight era. And you can see the helpers over to the over in the distance at San Luis. Those are for the tank trains that used to run up and down Cuesta, which no longer do that, sadly. But I did get one just before, like in the last few years. This was. Well, they stopped running the tank train in 2017, but this is somewhere around 2004, 2005. So there was still a lot of life left in the tank trains, but not with SP engines. And this was pretty exciting to get an unpatched SP rolling up. This is almost 10 years, about 10 years after the UP-SP merger. And we do get work trains that run up and down the hill, although they're not with SP power leading anymore. But when I first moved up in the area, you could drive up and down the Salinas Valley and you could see searchlights everywhere. I mean, nothing had changed. It was all pretty much, except for the welded rail, everything looked the way it did when daylights were running up and down the line. And you could see that freight is coming in the distance. You could see the searchlights a little further down. And if you even look where the freight train is a little bit far, like almost to the end of the train, you can see a green signal. from the next set of searchlights. So I mean, 3 sets in one shot was pretty amazing. This is called King City, which is kind of in the middle of, or at the lower end of the Salinas Valley. And here's the freight blasting through, going through the sprinklers and heading to what we call Tunnel 5.5, which is kind of a lonely tunnel all by itself on the old coast sub. We also got some amazing stuff when UP started running log trains through the area. And this was because there was a wildfire in Arizona that had scorched the lumber. However, it was all usable, just cosmetically, it was not good anymore. But so they began this operation where BNSF or UP would handle the lumber out of Arizona. They would come up the coastline, and then they would be handed off to the Sierra Railroad a little further north of or just northeast of the Bay Area. But this was just amazing to see trains like this rolling through the coast subdivision. And this is in a little area called Aromas, which is a really beautiful, bucolic place with oak trees and rolling hills. And this is just about 3 miles west of where we live. This is Castroville, the artichoke capital of the world. And you can see all kinds of artichokes are being picked over to the left. You can see the farm crews. And, sadly, these are the only trains we get now. As occasional reposition moves. We'll get a detour freight, but we'll get empty well cars to be put in storage. But all we really get are the Coast Starlights and a lot of locals. And this is pretty much a summary of what we get. And we do get a lot of locals that run through the area, but pretty much it's the Coast Starlights and UP GP60s, which isn't too bad. And you can see this one Cotton Belt unit. This is only taken back in July. It's in the process of unpatching itself, and you can see the SSW is like reclaiming its spot. So the UP Shield. So this is a little area called One Post. This is where the tank train would operate. This was where it would load oil and then operate down Cuesta to San Luis Obispo and then on to LA. There's one train that we can count on that runs the length of the Salinas Valley now, south of Salinas, and that is the Santa Margarita local, which you see here passing the tank train power. So that's pretty much our only train now that runs up and down that valley, but we do have, it's a beautiful area. I just wish there were more trains, but it's very fun to have missions right beside the tracks, at least in San Miguel. I mean, the mission is literally next to the main line. And this was a great little special that we chased. Laura and I chased this back in 2020. And pretty much specials in Coast Starlights are the only surprises we get. And the Coast Starlight in this case was, had all kinds of crazy power on it. And this is a little town called San Lucas. And the light was just incredible. But, and then if we get a heritage unit here and there, that definitely adds spice to everything. I mean, we have our new Chargers that are taking over the Coast Starlights, but it was really great to get this, the old Pepsi can from the 90s this is at that little tunnel I mentioned north of King City, Tunnel 5.5, the last seconds of sunlight before everything went blah. And then I got one more Centennial fix, but we've had a lot of Centennials, so I'll keep moving. We have a lot of, surprisingly, a lot of BNSF power has shown its face through this, through the coastline. And they'll usually be put on in Seattle or in Oregon. And I would guess probably just in Seattle. And they'll run all the way down. In this case, it was really unusual to get something like an SD Mac. And then we got an actual BNSF special. And this was one of their Round the West specials that mostly ran on BNSF territory, but they did get an arrangement with the UP to run down the coastline. So it's pretty amazing to see an 18-car special coming down the coast. And there's that special we saw before, so we'll keep it moving. And this was a tank train detour in the last light of day. But what happened is there had been an accident north of LA, and so they had to run this train up the valley over to Tehachapi, through the Central Valley, and then swing around the Bay Area and come down the coastline. So this is pretty much a 1 in a million shot that never happened again. A little bit of Salinas Valley flavor, climbing on tractors. And our dear departed Pacific Parlor cars, the last legacy, the last vestige of Santa Fe on Amtrak. These were running on the Coast Starlight until 2018, and this is the second to last day of operation. And Laura kindly volunteered to be the stunt driver so that I could do pan photos in the back seat of her car. And it wouldn't be the Salinas Valley without the demolition derby that happens every summer. Every summer, the truck drivers forget that there are trains on this line. And in this case, the Coast Starlight number 11 hit a tomato truck. And I heard it on the scanner, and we were able to get, Kat was with me, and we were able to get down here in time to get photos before anything changed. And you could see the trailers decimated. And thank God that the guy's okay. But you could see the tomatoes were destroyed. There were tomatoes everywhere. And if you look really close on the windshield wiper, there was a tomato. I did not put that there. The crew did not put that there. That was just one of those fun little nuggets that if you're looking close enough, you see. So this will be a quick tour of our signal museum. The one nice thing about not having a lot of trains is all these old searchlight signals are still in use, and there's still hand-thrown switches. And in this case, this is only from a few months ago. So it's pretty amazing to see crew, have to climb down, throw switches, just like the old days. This is the last, this is kind of the older, this is when there were a lot of searchlights still on the line. But this was the last tunnel motor to come down the coastline, at least that we know of. And it was patched, but for some reason they hadn't undone the SP on the nose. And a friend texted me and told me this was coming. And this was around 2007, 2008. And the last tunnel motor we ever saw on the line. So thank goodness we still got some locals that have, former cotton belt power, and you can still get a little bit of SP gray with searchlights. Speaking of searchlights, there are 3 incredibly rare searchlights that still have their siding lamps, the original white lamp that tells the crew that, you've got to throw the switch and go into the siding. And this is the only time I know of that the Coast Starlights have ever met at Castroville, which is very close to where we live. And both trains were running quite late. The train to the left was about 8 hours late. The guy that's facing us, number 14, that's the northbound train, he was about 3 hours, maybe 2-3 hours late. Anyway, it all worked out to get this incredible meet, which I'm sure I'll never see again. How many times in 2023 can you imagine 2 long distance passenger trains having to stop and meet like that, and for their the poor conductor having to get out and throw switches so they can get around each other? It's pretty amazing. And this is a find we just discovered recently. Thanks to Vic Neves, I figured out what this is. This has been 20 years I drove past this thing and never figured it out. I never noticed it. And one day I wondered what this concrete post was. Well, it's a signpost to let the crew know back in the pre-radio days that 99 reefer cars, that you're at the 99 reefer car mark. So the crew knew they could stop their train, and the rear crew could climb out of the conductor could climb out of the caboose and reline the switch to come out of the siding. I could not believe that's what this was. It's survived all this time, but it's made of concrete, so I guess nobody can really haul it off. So we also, when you get into the northern part of where we live, we have this beautiful area called Elkhorn Slough, and we do get military trains now and then. We get our Coast Starlights, and pretty much any chance I can, I try to get up there when it's clear and there's not a lot of fog. But this is such a beautiful area. This is a little tributary that comes in from the Pacific, an area called Moss Landing. And Elkhorn Slough is a beautiful refuge, all kinds of birds and wildlife. And if you can find your way up to some of the bluffs, you can get shots like this. And then occasionally you can see crazy combinations like this with a BNSF war bonnet and a heritage unit actually coming down the line. And one quick Santa Cruz shot. This is our late great Santa Cruz local. This is at the northern end of Monterey Bay. This was one of the most scenic branch lines I've ever seen that the UP operated until about 2009. And it's had a series of operators since then, but unfortunately they've had a few washouts, and the line is pretty much dead outside of the southern end. Nothing can really go up to Santa Cruz anymore, but this was in 2005, and it's pretty great. So one last little visit to the northern end of the coastline. This is a rock train that will run out of the little yard at Watsonville Junction and go to this quarry called Granite Rock. And this quarry has one of the last searchlight bridges on the SP system that I know of in California. I think this is one of maybe 2 that are left that are still in their original state. But this one you have to hike in, and I don't think you're allowed to, but I hiked in along the track and kind of hid because I knew I wanted to get train 14 going under this bridge. But then I could hear the local coming, and that's what I was counting on, is I knew there would be 2 locals after this, or the local and then the rock train. And so look at this. I mean, it's just amazing that you can get shots like this with searchlights, and the pole line isn't working, obviously, but just to get this kind of a line side character, it's like a time machine to see this sort of, to see a scene like this. Oh, I almost forgot. Yeah, we had lots of floods this winter. We had historic rains, and the coastline was not flooded, but a bridge was damaged further south in the Santa Barbara, Vandenberg area. And so we suddenly had a bunch of work trains in January and February running up and down the line. And this is an area that I've never even seen a trickle of water. And there's a road that goes to the right. And if you drive on that road, it's the Railfan Road. It's called Metz Road. And so we were calling this Lake Metz. But that road, if you're ever along the coastline south of Soledad and in the southern end of the Salinas Valley, that's the road you want to follow the tracks. And so our chargers have arrived. This was the very first charger to ever go up the coastline, and look how green it all was. We were really lucky that they showed up while the hills were still green. And then this was a new spot I discovered just in the summer, where there's a little hilly area north of that Granite Rock quarry you just saw. And look at the wildflowers going up the hills and all the green pastoral hills. And this is just a tiny little opening that I had to park, get my step ladder. Laura has the drone, I don't. So I'm old schooling it for all this stuff, but it was pretty neat to find this little area. And that's train 14. And this is also train 14 at sunset. We get really nifty sunsets on the coastline. All right, hopefully you're all still with me. This is a small little piece at the end just to give you some Northwest excitement, or hopefully excitement. I've never scanned any of these slides before, but my family and I would make all these little trips on train during the summers when I was growing up, all through the 80s. We normally go to Salt Lake City and Denver, but for a couple of years, we decided to go up to Portland and Seattle. And so here is the Pioneer going through the Blue Mountains of Oregon in 1985. And so I was able to get over to the engine house, and there was Hustle Muscle, the original SD45, which I couldn't believe it was even there. And of course, now it's in its great northern colors. It looks fabulous, but it was pretty neat to catch this in Portland. Let's see. And so I only threw in one Portland just for the sake of pacing, but I wanted to throw this in. This is Seattle. This is Interbay. Of course, you guys all know this, so bear with me if I'm not saying the right names, but we had gone to Seattle on the same trip, so it's still 1985. And, I talked my mom into, and my mom didn't drive, so we would always get cabs. And so we would just tell the cabbie, we need to go to the train yard. We'd tell them where exactly to go, and the guy would drop us off. And so my mom and I walked into the roundhouse and found some guy, and he said, yeah, if you sign something, you can walk around. So we signed our waiver, and he said, don't get killed. And off we went. And so, one of those great safety first moments that you'll never get to do again. And so we got to walk through the roundhouse, we got to see the turntable, and while I'm like trying to line up shots, here comes a pair of F40s onto the turntable. And I was, F40s were kind of everyday stuff for me at the time, but boy, this was pretty exciting to see it with BN engines all around it, and especially on a turntable. And then look at all these great old switchers and SD40s, and I was just in heaven. And then inside the roundhouse was the very first Tiger Stripe 8002. And they, again, the guy was like, yeah, you can walk around, just don't walk along the engines. Just, stay out in front of them all. But he let me take some pictures of the tiger stripes. So it was pretty exciting. This is before the GP50s had arrived. So my one and only freight train that happened while we were there was this great stack train, the Sealand stack train with those beautiful red double stack cars. And so there's 4 SD40s, and I'm happy to get a train. This is very exciting. This is all new. And then on the back, there's business cars. I couldn't believe it, a caboose and business cars. And there's the Glacier View, which is still on BNSF. And I believe that's the Stampede Pass in front of it. But I was over the moon. I was pretty excited. So now we are fast forwarding to 1995. This had been my one and only trip to Montana until last October. But I went with Dave Bussey and Martin Orozco and about 3 or 4 of the Southern California Mafia crowd. We all flew up to Montana for the Canadian Thanksgiving at the Isaac Walton Inn. And so we spent about 4 or 5 days shooting BN, and this is in October of 1995, so at the very end of the BN era. It's all coming to an end, and so we flew into Spokane and then rented a car and went through the Idaho Panhandle, and we stayed a night in Sandpoint. And so we hung out by the depot. I did time exposures. We got trains, westbound trains with all those great searchlights and signal bridges, and I really dug this one too. And obviously this was all new for me, but it was, I began to realize why everyone loves Montana. So as we're in the Idaho, and we're in the Panhandle, these were some of the coolest shots because the skies opened up on us and it was just pouring on us. And suddenly this ray of sunshine came out. And so 2 or 3 of us were kind of huddled under the tailgate of, we'd rented like a Ford Explorer or something like that, and whatever it was at the time. But we all had the lift gate open, and we were like 2 of us were hiding under it. A couple of the guys, Charlie Dissinger was also there, and he was like out in the rain. And but it was just amazing to get a downpour like this with the sun, with the sun lighting everything up. And then we got a couple sharks, which was pretty cool. The old LMX leasers, and those fall colors were just so beautiful. And so then we kept going along, heading to Montana. And this I learned from Jonathan. This is Fisher River. I'd always had this down as Libby or near Libby, Montana. But I love this area. We hiked up the hill, and I just loved this curve. It was just wonderful. And we lucked out with getting some sun, and there's just enough fall color kind of popping around to lighten up the shot. And that huge rocky cut from when BN built this part of the line in 72, I believe. So another highlight of Sandpoint is we'd stayed the night. In the morning, I got, at the time, my only Montana rail link train with a classic SD45 and 40 combo. And look out, man, what great light. The sun came out, lit everything up, but nothing compared to what everyone else has shot. I mean, there have been so many great photographers that have just shot the heck out of it, but it was fun to have my own little shot. And finally, last October, we got back and got to do it right. So here is Lake Pend Oreille, and we hung out on both sides of the lake shooting trains. Never really got a lot of sun, but it was pretty cool to see trains going over the line. And this is back when it was single track. And then this high railer came along, and I love this because I didn't know they had red high railers. I thought everything was green. So that was pretty fun. I'm sure glad I shot this. It's not something that you see. It's not something I might have normally shot if it was, back home in, Southern California. But so this is at Sandpoint. So then by now we'd gotten to the Isaac Walton Inn, and we had our base, and we took off to head east out of Essex. And this was the shot at Moriah Summit that I really, I was really hoping to get something like this. And that hill, I hiked off that highway, and I'm sure Justin's like laughing at me right now, but I hiked up that hill and I was just wheezing when I got up there. And shoot, this is 95. So I was only like not even 30, but that hill was brutal, but boy, what a shot. And the sun had just come out, just enough sun to lighten it up. And you can see the clearing, the clouds clearing the snow. And but this is the eastbound Empire Builder, as probably everybody knows. And then, of course, we ended up at the Great Northern Publicity Spot, and we got there's a pair of helpers, and we had a westbound grain. And at the time, BN had a lot of leaser units and Santa Fe engines mixed into things. But I just love this with the shadows on the Rockies and all those great clouds kind of swirling in and out. And then a little two-shot sequence from Tunnel 4, I believe this is near West Glacier, and we got tons of grain trains. I mean, it was just, the rush was on during that October. This was all early October, like from about the 3rd through the 7th in 1995. And then at Moriah Summit, I got this going away shot, and I just love this because, at the time, growing up with SD40s, I didn't realize it until, I got a little older and realized these were our F units, and it was pretty neat to get a shot that really shows, even if it doesn't have the sound, it gives you the feel of what it was like to live with them. And I think this is our last shot from 1995. We were out at Cut Bank, way at the east end out in the plains, and here comes this westbound with a GP9 in the consist, and it was working. And we chased this thing for a long time. We never really got sun on it, but boy, it was sure cool to get a BN train with GP9 power. So Laura and Kat and I did a little trip. This is 2006, and we were driving along the Columbia. So I just thought I'd throw in something that's a little more modern. Obviously, it's the BNSF era, but we were driving along Columbia following another train and got this guy. But then we got to the Brooklyn Roundhouse. We were able to see it before it all changed and moved to the beautiful new facility. But we got to see the old school place, and Dave Lustig was a pal and called Doyle, who I'd never met at the time. This is all like, again, 2006. And Doyle said, yeah, have him come in. So we got a really nice tour of the Roundhouse. And Doyle, he was very gracious and let me snap some pictures of him with the 4449, since Laura and I have so much history with that beautiful engine. And then, of course, he had his PA there, which was, in a very, very different state of the rebuilding stage at the time, but it looked great up front. Then you got around to the sides. You can see he still had a lot of work to do, but he let me go up in the cab, and I immediately reverted to being 10 years old. I mean, it was like, my pal Bob Spinuzzi and I met each other because he was walking by me in 7th grade and said, and I had a Walters catalog on my desk with Santa Fe PAs on the cover in HO scale. And he goes, you like trains? And that was 7th grade, and we've been friends and brothers ever since. And so to finally be in the cab of a PA and to see one in person was just so meaningful for me. It meant the world. And so there I am, being a total dork, saying, take a picture of me. And then Doyle said, well, climb up in all the cabs, check everything out. And there's Kat, and she's actually having a lot of fun. She just is very intently staring in the cab of the 4449. And Laura was hanging out with us. It was all really fun. And Doyle was just the most gracious host. And so it's fun to get back to Portland when we can. Nowadays, Winter Rails here is in Oregon. Sorry, Winter Rails in Oregon. And so we try to build some rail fending time after that. Randall Pratt helped me with finding spots like this. And I really appreciate all the local fans who have helped. And then, being able to chase locals like the Portland Western, the Toledo Hauler, and here's a few shots from that during Winter Rails, I think somewhere around 2016, 2017. It's just so different from California. And then this is it, the finale. And it's nothing huge, but we finally got back to Montana 27 years later, and we got to, have kind of a farewell visit to Montana Rail Link. And this is in the area near Avon. We were in Deer Lodge staying the night and then drove up to this area, and I could see the signals were lit for something to happen. Well, it turns out we stumbled on a rare eastbound coal train because of the Canadian longshoremen strike that was happening last October. Trains were detouring on BNSF. And so here was this eastbound coal train, which I learned from Justin later was really rare. But you know, I met a really cool superintendent, Will Southwick, and he's the guy standing on the, he's the one on the unit that's in that heroic pose with, you know, all the crew. And he, oops, sorry, hang on, my email's yelling at me, silly. There we go. So anyway, he gave us a tip, told us what was happening, and we were able to shoot this helper move. And gosh, you know, then we're chasing a train towards Mullen Pass eastbound. And here's the train just a little bit east of Avon with the MRL helpers. And then we're in my Bronco, which probably enough of you have heard about, but we were pacing the train. It was really, really amazing to get to chase them up there. So then we visited with Justin, visiting with Bob, and I went to this little area called Quorum and was able to take advantage of the fall colors with the new Chargers. And this was the first Charger I ever saw operating in person. And then I learned about bears. We were at Whitefish, and we were at the East End, and there was a BN, like a SD60M in the consist. And we thought, well, we'll try to get to the East End of Whitefish Yard and get some photos. And you know, I'd walk quite a ways from the truck, and all of a sudden I could hear Bob behind me going, "There's a bear!" And I'm looking around, and this bear comes across all the tracks. Turns out the crew was talking about him on the radio. He's leaping over the rails, running at full speed. And here's a little shot to give you more of the idea. If you look to the left, I highlighted him so you could see his feet in the air. He was moving so fast. And I mean, I'd already been warned about bears. I was definitely aware, but this put the fear of God in me. And Bob was like, "Yeah, you might have beat him back to the truck." So I'm going back up on Thursday actually to hang out with Bob and Justin again. And one of the things I hope to get are these beautiful Northern Pacific searchlights. You know, even though the Montana railing's coming to an end, you know, that is definitely the attraction. But the searchlight signals are also, you know, something I want to get one more time. And these are such beauties, and they clearly will not be around much longer once BNSF takes over. But we were able to get this great super grain with two of the cantilevers. And if you look really far back there, you can see the lights of another cantilever. And so I think this is one of my last shots, but Justin gave me this wonderful tip that the day one locomotive was coming on the builder, and Laura and I had been staying at the Isaac Walton for a night. So I chased this thing out to along Marias, and God, it'd been 27 years since I'd been there, and I'm trying to think, like, where can I get a shot where I can get like maybe something that's like that classic publicity photo. And I literally saw the sun in this spot, drove up the road, and ended up at the publicity spot, totally by chance, absolute dumb luck. And with fall colors too, it's pretty cool. And just, this was one of my last favorite Montana railing shots because it was so cool to see older power and see GP35s and, you know, old school. It's probably as close as I'll get to seeing old school Montana railing. We definitely shot the helpers on both passes. I saw SD40s, but this was a pretty neat find. We kind of stumbled on this train and hightailed it back to a spot where we could get them, you know, and they were hauling by us. We ended up at Livingston shooting trains, but I just wanted to show this shot because this is Laura's shot from her drone. And, you know, one of the fun things is, yeah, you can't hike or sneak into railroad yards anymore, but now your drone can do it for you. And Laura did this fantastic shot of helper power, and you can see the Great Northern SDP40 is in the first set of helper engines over to the right. And then the veterans unit, the two commemorative Montana Rail engines are there, but what a beautiful complex to get to see it from that view. Okay, so that's it. I want to give you a quick little teaser of what I do at the center, but I have some Steinheimer photos, so hang in there. This is a Stan Kistler shot, who was another of my, you know, great mentors and then became a great friend. And I definitely someone I miss along with the many other greats. He was definitely one of them. And he took this iconic shot of the El Capitan leaving LA in the 60s at Union Station. But here's a few looks inside the center. We're not officially a museum, but we don't have that kind of space, but we have business offices, and then we have an archive in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm the lone California outpost, being the acquisitions coordinator and the marketing person. And that has helped me quite a bit, especially with working with collections from Steinheimer and from Stan Kistler, and also working with Tom Gildersleeve and Gordon Glattenberg and other greats. And then I get to help with books. And we publish. So what we do, instead of having a museum, we have traveling exhibitions, we have books, we have our quarterly magazine, Railroad Heritage, and we do online programs. And one of those is going to be coming with a shameless plug in just a moment. But of course, the big story of last year was the acquisition of the Richard Steinheimer collection. And I think I heard Shirley is tuned in. So I hope you're listening, Shirley. But Shirley opened her doors to us last June, and Ken Rehor, my brother from another mother, and Adrian Evans, our archives director, she and I spent 4 very full days sorting and packing up prints, slides, some black and white negatives, and some mementos, but mostly prints and slides. And it was just overwhelming what is there. And Ken and I just recently visited Shirley. We were just there last week, picking up some more materials and working with her. But things like this happen when I'm there. This is when life comes full circle. And one of the magazines that literally changed my life is sitting there in a binder with one of the proofs that Shirley had made, but there's the original transparency. And I'm holding the transparency of the cover photo of one of the magazines that changed my life. And I definitely had to walk out and kind of pull myself together. It was a really great, it was a moment that I'll never forget. And, so much of that happened, and Shirley's work is so great too. So, I mean, we're so lucky to have Shirley, who remembers everything and tells the greatest stories. And she's always there for us to help with scans and give, answer questions. And then she shares fun things like this, where you see Dick from 1966 to 1976, and you can see what that decade did to him. No, he just, you can see we are doing a program this coming Tuesday, and it's all about Stein's professional career, his photojournalism work, working with newspapers, and then his groundbreaking work in Silicon Valley, where he was inventing new photographic techniques as Silicon Valley was being born. And Ken, who has just amazing knowledge of all of this, he and I are going to be presenting this. And Shirley has given us all kinds of goodies that we're going to present. And it's a free online program, so I hope you'll join us. But before I go, I have to give you one last little Steinism. This is thanks to Adrian, who put together this great gift. We have, all the prints that Stein gave us of his famous Little Joe ride and Moonlight in December of '73, where he rode behind a Little Joe over the Bitterroots, and he used the nose of an SD-40 as his tripod to take these amazing time exposures. And so Adrian put it together and made it into a gift. And we all get hypnotized. We can watch this far too long. Okay, so there's just a quick way to check in with us. There's our magazine, Railroad Heritage. You can see what some of the covers look like. Scott Lotus is the editor. He's our executive director, and he's just an amazing person. He was the chief editor of the Rio Grande Steam book. He has edited several of the books, and he is the editor of the magazine. It's, I think, the most beautiful magazine out there. And and there is us. There's our gang. You can see some of the staff and our board of directors, and you can see Scott over to the left, and then yours truly to the right in Giants colors. And that's the way to follow us. You can find our programs on YouTube, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram and Threads. And it would not be a complete show without thanking my wonderful wife, Laura, who's been with me. Oh my gosh, we got married in 1989. So, and she's been with me ever since, and she's the greatest traveling partner I could ever have, and the greatest wife I could have, and mom, and she's a great drone pilot too. And there's our Bronco in the background at Tunnel 5 in Tehachapi. So thank you, honey, and thank you for putting up with me putting this whole show together. And thank you all. And that's it.